Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's great to be here. I will talk about engineering in the Fleet Air Arm. I did promise Clive that's what I'd talk about. But I will also talk about what else I did beyond that and why I managed to go from engineering in the Fleet Air Arm, which is a fairly good career path, into selling candy floss at a theme park, as my friends told me I did. I was actually director of engineering, but that's what they still say I did. And then into the RNLI. So it's not the average career path, so I'll go through some of that. We started talking about doing this lecture about 18 months, 2 years ago. It's taken a while to get here. So I'm really delighted to be here, so thank you very much. So as I said, I'll talk about the Fleet Air Arm, I'll talk about what I did, some of my stories, a couple of near misses, because they're always interesting, and then a little bit on Chessington and life in the RNLI, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for questions. So I joined the Navy in 15th of September 1993, and it's one of those days that is indelibly etched into your memory, that day when you turn up into Dartmouth College. I was just 19 by about a week, walking in thinking, oh my God, this is scary, what am I doing? But what an amazing experience. And I've never looked back. I did 25 years in the military when I left. But starting on the 15th of September, I went into Blake Division. My father before me was Royal Navy. Thankfully, he'd left before I joined, so I never had to serve for my dad and call him sir. So that was all right. But he was in Blake as well. So when I turned up and I joined Blake Division, and I phoned him up and said, I've made it, I'm here. I showed him where I was staying. It's like, I was in this room too. So it's funny how things go, isn't it? But 6 months at Dartmouth, learning to be an officer and hold your knife and fork properly and speak properly and say please and thank you and all the things your parents should have taught you. It was a really amazing experience. I loved it. With that, I got HMS Brazen. I did 8 weeks on that, which is your initial sea time, learning to be on a ship for the very first time. I tell you, that's quite daunting. When you're living in a mess deck with 20 other people thinking, God, how did I end up here? But it was an amazing 8 weeks. And then at the end of it, I joined HMS Ark Royal. So there I was, a fresh-faced 19-year-old, joining HMS Ark Royal, and we went straight out to Bosnia. We spent 6 months off the coast of Bosnia, former Yugoslavia. We had our Harriers going in and out every day over the territories. I was on board when Nick Richardson got shot down in his Harrier, and that was an interesting day because we were all sitting on board the carrier. We were there. And the first thing we heard about this was on CNN, because we had that on the news all day on the ship. And we see a picture saying, a Harrier's been shot down over Bosnia. It's like, okay, there aren't many Harriers flying in Bosnia. In fact, there are only ours. And we didn't know at this point, so we saw it on CNN, and the captain found out from there. So Nick got shot down. He was rescued by Combat Search and Rescue, sent back to the UK for a couple of weeks, and then came back to the ship. My memory of that couple of weeks of kind of exercise wasn't Nick when he came back saying, I was shot down and it was pretty terrifying. It was Oz, who was his wingman, saying, I was there too, don't forget me. And nobody talked about poor old Oz. We just talked about Nick all the time. But it was an amazing experience for a 19-year-old. It was a bit of a different sort of gap year. But obviously I was going to be an engineer, so I started, after my year with the Royal Navy, I went to Southampton University, spent 3 happy years there as a sponsored student, so that was quite nice. So I could afford a car and a flat where most of my colleagues couldn't. I did aeronautical engineering, and that was where I first met Rob East, who was my dean at the time. Clive and I will know Rob because he was on the committee that we both served on together. So that was quite something to bump into him. I did my 3 years and then joined HMS Sultan, which is where we do all our engineering training. And that was a year converting all the theory that you learn at university into something useful that you actually do something with. So we were hands-on on the aircraft, understanding, taking our theory of kind of gas engines and materials and turning it into the CEng helicopters. Like, how does it actually work? How do you fix it? That was a great year, but practical skills before joining 820 Squadron in Culdrose. So that's your first experience of engineering. You've got a team of engineers around you. They are actually looking after the aircraft. These are real aircraft doing real things. And again, not very old at this stage, faced with a squadron of 10 aircraft, going to sea, doing whatever it is we do at the time, thinking, I have a lot to learn here, but a great way to start your career. But instead of then going into engineering at that point, I took a bit of a career step and moved into flying, which I'll come back to in a minute. But the reason I'm going to pause there is when I was down there, before I started my flying training, I did one more little engineering job, which is about Merlin helicopter safety. So the Merlin was just being introduced or thought about being introduced at the time. And I did a 3-month project looking at how to safely bring Merlin into service. Not to start operating or do anything fancy with it, but just to have it in storage at Coldrose ready to roll out to the squadrons. And Merlin safety, there's a theme on Merlin safety throughout my talk, and I'll come back to it a number of times of how it's impacted my career, for better or for worse. So Merlin safety started for me just after my time on 820. But like all good military people, I continued my education throughout, so I got an open university degree in IT and computing, a bit of stuff around AI and databases, which was quite good fun. And then at Portsmouth University, I did an engineering management master's as well. So the military is great at keeping my qualifications going. So very much an engineer at heart, which is why obviously I'm now going to talk about flying. This is where I get excited. I take my engineering hat off and put my pilot hat on. Any pilots in the room? Yeah, a few. Pilot's favourite topic? Themselves. So bear with me while I talk about myself for a while, because this is, you know, what pilots do. But no, it was really good fun to stop engineering for a short while and go and do some flying training. I put these 3 aircraft up. This is where you start your flying training. So the Grob, the little white aircraft in the top, that was 5 of us flying over to France to spend 3 weeks in the south of France on a flying trip, based out of Bergerac. That was a great way to be away from the UK and just learn in a quiet, open airspace. Moving on to the yellow one, the Slingsby Firefly. That is just a pocket rocket. It's a big engine with a small seat, and it's just amazing what you can do with it. It's great for aerobatics, it's great for throwing around. It's quite forgiving as an aircraft, which as a junior student is quite a good thing. But you see these things doing to the displays, they are amazing. But overpowered for a little seat with a big engine, so a great place to start. And then on to the Squirrel, which is the single engine helicopter. My flying training was impacted by mad cow disease. No, I didn't get it. It was at the time when it was affecting the whole country, and being up in the north of England in Shropshire, it was quite bad around there in the north of Wales. So we had to decamp from there. We came down on Salisbury Plain with our helicopters, and we operated from down south for a while, where there was less BSE around at the time. So it's interesting how things impact you as you go. But the aim of this for me was to do a couple of frontline tours. So I've got 2 photos here for my 2 frontline tours before you go into the flight test and all that comes. So my first one was Commander Helicopter Force, and this is a CEng Mark IV parked in Alamara. Alamara was a slightly sad place to be. So you'll remember, I suspect, 6 Royal Military Police were killed in a building just outside Alamara, and the locals turned on them and they couldn't escape. It was a fairly unpleasant part of our history there. So we then forward located into there from Basra. We set up this small little camp just outside Alamara, 2 CEngs on there at all times, there to do casualty evacuation and rescue. That was quite a harrowing time, but I'll come back to Iraq in a minute. The second one was 771, so I was doing search and rescue in Cornwall. And you know, the picture we'll come back to that was on my intro slide of a 771 helicopter with an RNLI in front of it. That was 2005. I was actually flying that helicopter. That was my first kind of exercise with the RNLI. It's funny that I ended up there at latter in my career. Who knew? This picture, this is very typical of a pilot, I would suggest. We've just had a major emergency. We've just done a priority landing in the middle of Yelverton, just outside Dartmoor. We'd managed to distribute our gearbox oil all over Dartmoor, and in a space of about 10 minutes we'd gone from a full gearbox to an empty gearbox. So we put it down in Yelverton Airfield. The first thing Nigel and I did was got out and took a photo, because that's what pilots do. So there was us posing in front of it, cool as you like. We've just had a major emergency, but you know what, we're fine. Then we called the engineers to say, can you come and help? It took 2 days to come and fix. We'd had a gearbox failing with a seal on the back of the gearbox, and all the oil had just leaked out. The interesting here, Yelverton is an old historic airfield on the edge of Dartmoor. And as we landed, the locals came running out. It's like, oh, it's so great to see a helicopter here. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, we've been wanting one for ages. We've been asking the military to send one. It's really good. You just didn't tell us you were coming. So, okay, well, we're here now. They couldn't have been nicer. So they took us in, they looked after us, they looked after the engineers. So whilst we were camping next to the aircraft, because we needed to, they couldn't have been a better team to look after us. They just wish they had more notice. We didn't want to be there, but so be it. But one of the stories I'm going to talk about here was from my time on the Commander Helicopter Force, and this is where kind of engineering led by aviation accidents and incidents And it's great being an engineer in the aircraft when things are happening. You can kind of apply your engineering brain going, well, this isn't quite right. This shouldn't be doing this. You can look back afterwards and go, well, if we manage to change X, Y, and Z, no one else is going to have the problem we've just had. And this is one of those occasions. So we were flying down on Dartmoor. There were 3 of us in the aircraft, and we picked up 1 passenger. This poor unsuspecting chap who'd dropped his cadets off on the moors. That was great. And we were going to drop him off at the finish line where he was going to meet his troops later. We took off, and we were at about 1,000 feet, and the collective stuck. So for those of you not helicopter familiar, the collective is the thing that makes you go up and down. And it wouldn't move. Absolutely wouldn't move. We tried everything. We tried to kind of wrestle it. We tried to undo nuts and bolts and see if we could make it move. It was absolutely locked solid. And there was no way around it. There was no breakout. So how do you go down when your lever to make you go down doesn't go down? I mean, it was a pretty terrifying moment. All we could do was reduce the rotor speed to the lowest level we could get to. That starts you a descent, not a very rapid one, but it does start you a descent. The only other thing we could do is take out one of the hydraulic systems. There's 2 hydraulic systems. One of them, the primary one, holds your pitch on the blades. And if you take out the hydraulics, the blades drop ever so slightly. Not a lot, but it gives you about 200 foot per minute rate of descent. So we were over Dartmoor. We started our descent at Dartmoor to come back into Yeovilton, which is a fairly long way away, the longest finals ever. We were struggling. We were really finding it difficult to come down. If we'd had engine failures, if we'd had any other issues, we couldn't have recovered from it. There was nothing you could have done. So it was a fairly terrifying hour of what on earth are you going to do now? We did get it down safely. We managed to get it onto the airfield and roll down to the end of the airfield and safely shut everything down as quick as you could. But it was a fairly harrowing moment. The good bit from it is when we were looking at it at the end, you take that engineering mindset and go, how the hell did we get there? And let's make sure no one else does. So at that point, we did a rapid redesign of the collective, and we put a breakout system in it. So where you've got collars holding it in place and levers underneath it, we put a nice big breakout pin. So anyone else having that problem now, pull the pin, your lever will freely move. You can't let go of it now because it's going to just drop, so you have to now handle it, but at least you can get down safely. So it's really nice as an engineer to be able to see a good engineering solution come out of a misfortune. And that's where being an engineer in an aircraft was really beneficial. So that was one of my more scary moments, but lived to tell the tale. I said I'd come back to Iraq just briefly because I find it really interesting. You hear a lot of negative stories about Iraq. Should we be there? What was it like? The press were quite bad at telling the Iraq story. I found it a fairly amazing experience. We were there for, well, we did 3 tours, but obviously as a force we were there for quite a few years. We went in straight after taking the Al-Faw Peninsula. So 845 Squadron went in, captured Basra Airfield, and we arrived a few days later and moved into the airfield. Flying around, you see kind of dead aircraft and tanks all over the place from the Iran-Iraq war, and you see all the revetments around. We built tented cities quite quickly, so the one in the bottom is Shaiba, which is a medical base, and we took a lot of people in and out of that. We did a lot of ferrying of casualties, but we also did a lot of counter-smuggling. The hobby that the locals got into was taking their pickup trucks out into the desert, getting a great big rope, tying it to the 200-meter pylons, driving away quickly and collapsing them, and then stealing the copper wire from the top, because copper was worth a lot. So we spent a lot of time flying up and down electric pylons and things. So it was a really interesting time. The one at the bottom, the yacht on its side, is Saddam Hussein's yacht. It was the first thing to get sunk when everybody arrived. So they blew that up next to his palace and sunk it, so it was sitting in the river just rotting away. But regardless of people's thoughts about Iraq, should we be there, should we not, what was the politics, were there weapons of mass destruction, all of those things, we made a difference. And the picture in the middle at the top, I'll never forget flying into where the Marsh Arabs lived. And Saddam Hussein was quite good at trying to wipe out the Marsh Arabs. You know, it was a genocide. He was just basically drying up their land and wiping them out. And a lot of them had died and their livelihood was disappearing. One of the first things that happened when the Brits moved in was we blew up all the dams, put the water back into the marshland, and they, as a nation, were starting to come back again. The difference it made when we landed on giving them relief and aid, and you could see the difference it made to people, regardless of some of the other politics, we did make a difference. It was an important time to be there, and it felt, for me, like it was worth being there for. And I just thought it was worth sharing, because everyone's got their own opinions, but that's my view of what I think I got from it. I do feel for my mum, because my brother's in the army, and there was a point when he was in Shiba medical base, and I was in Basra as the air base, and we went and met up, because we thought that was a hoot. Why wouldn't you go and meet up and say hi to each other? My poor old mum sitting at home thinking, oh my God, they're both in a war zone, and now they've decided to go and sit together. What the worst nightmare for her. So we put her through it without thinking, but there we go. Having done 2 tours, I then went on to become a maintenance test pilot. And I said Merlin's safety has a kind of interesting role in my history of how I ended up doing what I did at the Fleetlands Air Base. At the end of my time on 771, when I was down in Culdrose, I was going to go and do my Merlin conversion, fly a Merlin, stay in Culdrose and be the Merlin test pilot. That was kind of what was going to happen next. And I was on duty on 771, standing on the balcony as a Merlin helicopter plastered itself all over Culdrose Air Station. It had a tail control failure. It hit the deck quite hard. The gearbox peeled off, came onto the deck in front, bits of aircraft all over the place. The pilots were okay. One of them took a knock to the knee from a bit of blade, but he was all right. But the aircraft was absolutely all over the place. And it's interesting from an engineering perspective, just to reflect on that for a second, that if you go back to the Comet, and you know, the Comet disasters back in the 50s, I think it was 1954, square windows came up as a topic, and you were getting cracks in the corner of square windows. And that led to the decompression of the aircraft, and therefore that one blew up. The Merlin helicopter tail design had square holes on it, a part of the tail. And interestingly, we're getting the same propagation in some of those cracks on the tail. So, short memories, you know, we look at the Comet disasters thinking that wasn't clever, let's not have square holes in aviation. And yet the Merlin, a brand new aircraft in service, still kind of put through the motions, had a square hole and it got the same crack propagation on the corner of it. And that's why it failed. So the Merlin safety stopped me doing Merlin flying because they were all grounded. So I couldn't go and do that. So I had to move to Fleetlands. And I got 4 years at Fleetlands, which, lucky me, that was just the best job ever. So I could have been in Culdrose flying Merlin, and thanks to Merlin safety, not for the aircraft, but for me, I ended up at Fleetlands. And that was amazing, because I got to fly all the CEngs, and the Chinook, and the Lynx. And that took me up to the end of my flying career, and I got my 2,000 hours at the end of it. A couple of interesting stories for you. The CEng is my favourite aircraft. I absolutely love it. You know, and if I could go and fly any aircraft, it's not some of the modern ones, the fly-by-wire, the fancy graphics and all the clever stuff. The CEng is a good hands-on aircraft. You know, and when you move a stick, that's what happens. It moves with you. So, 2 kind of bits to talk about. This is where, again, being an engineer in the aircraft and my engineering brain kind of working. So the first incident we had, sitting on the ground, we'd done all our ground tests and we're going into our first flight, so we're picking up into a hover. And as we did so, the aircraft spinning quite rapidly. It's not meant to do that. We managed to land on without rolling the aircraft, thinking that's okay. And my brain was telling me as an engineer that the only thing that could be going wrong was that there was something wrong with there's a spring in the tail. And that puts pitch on the blade so that when you take off, it's got enough pitch to stop you spinning before you kick the pedals. So it's a really important spring. It's about that big, but it's probably one of the more important things in that whole tail drive system is this spring. And I'm thinking, either it's failed or it's not connected properly, because there's no way I'd be spinning that fast otherwise. So my engineering brain was saying, it's really obvious what the problem is. You've got a problem with your spring in the tail. Don't take off again. My pilot brain was thinking, no one could have not connected the spring or fitted it backwards. I mean, that's not going to happen. You know, they must have fitted it right. So it's got to be something like a flight control system. So I, as the captain, with Mike as my co-pilot, decided we'd take out the flight control system, which makes handling the aircraft much, much harder, because that's going to solve the problem, and we'll take off and we'll do it again. So we took off, it was spinning a lot harder, and it was even harder to control because we now didn't have a flight control system helping us. We managed to land on again safely, thank God. So, you know, the engineer was saying, don't take off again, that's a really stupid idea. And the pilot said, yeah, go on, it'll be fine. So we did. We were right, of course. The tail wasn't connected properly. So this spring, this all-important spring, had been fitted upside down. So instead of putting on a little bit of pitch to stop you spinning, it had twice the pitch. So we were spinning very quick. So that was a fairly hairy moment. That's where my engineer's brain, I should have listened. I should have taken the engineer bit in there and said, let's just go with that. But yeah, that was an interesting one. The second CEng incident, this one was, again, another kind of interesting one for me as an engineer. There are 3 hydraulic systems in a CEng. 2 of them control the head and give you power to the head so that when you move the stick, the rotors will move with you. And the third one does important things like undercarriage. So we were flying back into Portsmouth and we had hydraulic fluid running down the side of the aircraft. I was like, okay, not great. And one of my main gauges was starting to drop. And it was the auxiliary hydraulic system which gives you quite a lot of input into the flight control system. So that was starting to fail. You can fly with one of the 2 working, that's okay. If both go, you're in trouble. You cannot physically move the controls enough to make this work. So we knew that we had to get back and land as quick as you could. So generally in that situation, you take the nearest safe point of land and land on it. But at that point, we started getting more hydraulic fluid coming down, thinking, well, okay, this is really not a good place to be. Thankfully, it was my utility system. I say thankfully. Thankfully, it was a utility system which was affecting my undercarriage, not the flying control. So I could continue flying. I now couldn't land because I didn't have any wheels. And I couldn't take the nearest point of grass because that wasn't going to work. So I had to fly back to Fleetlands, which is about 15 minutes away. Not great when you've got only one hydraulic system. It's already hard enough. And Mike and I are there working as hard as we can to keep this thing going, thinking, how are we going to get back? It's hard enough to fly as it is. And you've then got to get the undercarriage down. So we managed to get into a hover. I managed to get an idiot on the ground, very brave man, I'm really glad he did it, but oh my God, I wouldn't have done it, to come under the aircraft and pull the wheels down, because that's the only option we had. We were working really hard. He didn't know how hard we were working, thankfully, just to hold it steady. So he comes in, gets the wheel down, puts the pin in, runs away quickly, we then land on. So we'd lost 2 of our 3 hydraulics. My engineer's brain going, oh my God, if we've lost 2, what have they done? They haven't connected something properly. They've failed to do something. The third one's going to go. And you have all those moments going, there is no way out of that. There isn't a plan B or C out of that one. So we've had some fairly interesting moments, but bless her, the CEng is such a good aircraft and we know it so well, you can generally get it back. But this is where, being an engineer, I was able to use all of my engineering knowledge and experience, not my piloting skills, that's important, but actually understanding from an engineer what was really going on allowed me to make choices I probably wouldn't have made as a pilot. So it was really interesting having that. As I said, I got to fly the Chinook as well. I've got no scary stories on a Chinook. Honestly, when it comes back fully loaded from operations, it's got all the kit in it. It's a pretty impressive beast. When you then give it to us, take every little bit of kit out of it you don't need, and then say, go and fly that. The danger was it was too powerful. I could end up flying too fast, climbing too fast. I could end up more out of control if you weren't careful, because it was so light and so overpowered, because it was designed to have all the heavy loads in it. It was an amazing aircraft. Absolutely loved it. And the Lynx, which I love the Lynx. We've got the Army versions, Mark 7 and Mark 9 with the skids and wheels, and the Navy ones, Mark 3 and Mark 8, including the Black Cat display team aircraft, which is quite cool to play around with, because again, we've taken quite a bit out of that and allowed it to do a lot more aerodynamics. So I had an awful lot of fun at Fleetlands for 4 years, flying some amazing aircraft. Plenty more stories of things that went well and when didn't, but you know, the 2 I've shared are perhaps the most interesting from an engineering point of view, what I had to consider. But that was enough danger for me. I think I'd seen enough. So it was a really nice time to hang up my flying gloves and go back into engineering. I'm an engineer at heart. I'm always going to be an engineer. I love being an engineer. And my career was very much as an engineer. I always knew my flying days were very limited. They were only going to be 8 or 9 years. I got 9, I got 2,000 hours. But that was plenty to then come back and be an air engineer. So I joined A48 Squadron. That's a training squadron predominantly. So we train all our Commando helicopter pilots there. So I did my flying training with them. We also train all our air engineers there, from the very junior level all the way up through the apprentices into the junior officers. So it's a great squadron. We trained probably 360 odd engineers when I went through my time there for 18 months, and 3 generations of pilots, or 3 courses of pilots coming through. We also do maritime counter-terrorism on 848. So as an engineer, I had 2 aircraft permanently at the ready, so that if something were to happen around the coast, whether they, I don't know, a terrorist tried to take an oil tanker or something like that, we would respond. We would send our aircraft out and go and do whatever it is we had to do to recover things. So having that on standby, that was a national commitment on side of training, gave us an interesting kind of engineering challenge, but quite a fun one to have. But then we got the Haddon Cave report through from the military. And for those of you sort of well read in this, you'll know from a Nimrod accident, XV-230 blew up in 2006 over Afghanistan, killing 13 people. Wasn't down to enemy action, it was down to engineering and operational decisions. You've got a fuel pipe in the wing and you've got electric circuits next to it. Fuel leaking out of the fuel pipe next to sparking electrics, ended up in a catastrophic explosion. But we'd sort of known about the design from a military point of view. We'd understood that that was a risk, but it was an okay risk because it hadn't happened and it was probably not going to happen. And there was quite a complacency in engineering in the military. So the Haddon Cave report was a fairly damning report. It came out with 89 recommendations. We adopted every single one of them. And I was invited into Navy Command at that point, having just been on the squadron, to come and lead the project for the Fleet Air Arm. And that was an immense privilege, but a hell of a responsibility to come out from kind of operations and doing all my test flying into a policy job. I'd not written policy before. That was a new thing for me as an engineer. I understood it. I'd worked out how to get round half of it through my career. It's probably why they chose me, to be honest. Don't write it like you would have broken it. But to come and work in Navy Command for a couple of years, writing the policy that was going to define air engineering for the next generations to come. So we stole all the good practice from the civil aviation. So continuing airworthiness management organizations, air engineering regulations, certification, all the good practice that happens in civil, we stole, put a military badge on the top, rewrote it slightly to suit what we did and said that was ours. There was a formation of the Military Aviation Authority, the MAA. Again, a whole new way of thinking, bringing all these defence organisations together from across flight test and regulation and quality and safety into one single organisation and giving them oversight of military aviation. From an engineer's point of view, that was quite an exciting time to be involved in this, bringing duty holders into the air station. It was a whole new way of thinking. And I got to lead that for Navy Command, and it was that safety engineering and all that went with it. I really enjoyed that job. I got promoted while I was there. It was obviously going well. So I stayed there for another 2 years and then led the team to deliver that program. And it was a really good way of being an engineer, having done all the operations, to step out of operations to something very different and very interesting. But I loved it. It was great fun. And it sort of set me up for things that were going to follow. I then moved into Commander Helicopter Force, back into Commander Helicopter Force. Having spent time there as an engineer and as an operator, I was well placed to be the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Chief Engineer, Form 4 holder, as we were. And for me, it was just the pinnacle of my military career. I really enjoyed being in charge of the force. We had 45 aircraft, 168 vehicles. We had 860 engineers and pilots and medics and various other things. And we were operating globally. It was an amazing opportunity to run a force like that as the Deputy Chief of Staff. I think I look at it with fondness and sadness. And I say that because I had to retire the CEng Mark IV. The aircraft I'd grown up with, the aircraft I loved so much, and it had given me so much, and I'd enjoyed flying it and engineering it through my career. I got to retire the CEng Mark IV. That was one of my big moments, was grounding that at the end of its time, celebrating the success of all that was, and introducing the Merlin Mark III. The RAF were flying it at the time, so we took it off them and brought it down to Yeovilton and introduced that for the military. At the same time, we had retired the Lynx and were bringing in the Wildcat. So during my time, we'd gone through a massive transition from two aircraft we'd known and loved all our careers to starting again with a Merlin and a Wildcat and getting the whole force back up to generation. And as an engineer leading that, what an amazing opportunity. One of the projects I had while I was there, which I was really proud of, the Merlin Mark III Alpha, which was a distinct variant. So they were all Mark IIIs. There were a couple of Mark III Alphas. They weren't cleared to go to sea. They hadn't done any embarked operations or clearance at all, and there were only two of them. So I was given a challenge of, can you get them to sea? Maybe, maybe not sure. Oh, could you do that on a French ship, not an English one? So, okay, now you're really pushing it. Oh, and we want to operate in the Pacific for 6 months. So, okay. when do you need this by? Thinking, 18 months, 2 years. It's like 3 months. Oh my God. So I said in my little bio that I'd never worked in the equipment and support team, the DE&S. I'd managed to avoid that through my career, but this was the closest I got. We had to get teams from flight test, from clearance, from Navy Command, from the project teams, from operations, and we worked our socks off. We got these things cleared to fly on a UK ship. We then got it to cleared onto a French ship. We had to go and spend time with them because they were used to flying gazelles and pumas and other things, not these. And then we got them embarked and operated. It was an amazing 3 months, and I've never seen a team pull together like we did. And to be standing there and achieve that, and to deliver that project was just amazing. It was the year that we were introducing the aircraft carrier for the first time, the new carriers, and we had the Joint Strike Fighter coming in as well as our new aircraft. So with a lot going on in military aviation, I personally won the Ed Dunning Trophy, which normally goes to a squadron or unit, but I won it personally for delivering that project in 3 months to get these 2 aircraft to sea. And the Ed Dunning is awarded for the biggest single contribution to maritime aviation in that year. So that was quite a proud achievement for me as an engineer to be able to deliver something like that, which is why I look so fondly on this job. So that's sort of where my military career took me, and it's quite an interesting career going through safety, operations, some interesting learnings along the way, some amazing projects to deliver, some near misses. It was an amazing year, and that was 25 years. There were other jobs in there. There was a program management. I'm not going to talk about that. That's really boring. I did some training. It's like, yeah. But these were the highlights for me. These were the exciting bits of my career. So what do you do with that? When you've got 25 years of operational engineering, safety engineering, and everything else, where do you go? And I said Merlin safety was a key theme through my career. So here's a different Merlin safety for you. Alton Towers, 2015. There was a shocking accident where a roller coaster, 2 cars crashed into each other, and life-changing injuries for the girls in the front of the first car as they crashed into a static car sitting in front of it. Now, the way roller coasters are designed is 2 cars can't be in the same part of the track at the same time. It just doesn't allow you to. The computer says no. Sadly, there was a bit of a manual override that allowed this to happen. There was a human failing in all of this. It wasn't the individual's fault. There was a system failing. We knew about it as managers. But Merlin owned Alton Towers, and it was a Merlin safety incident that led me to working at Chessington World of Adventures. I was brought in because I'm an operational engineer and a safety engineer. We needed to do operational engineering and safety. So thanks to Merlin and thanks to a safety incident, theme of my career, I ended up working at Chessington World of Adventures. And as I said, most of my colleagues go, you're going to sell popcorn, I'll come and see you on the gate, thanks very much, it's going to be great. But as director of engineering, I had 27 rides and roller coasters to look after. I had over 1,000 animals. My job was to make sure they stayed one side of the enclosure and you stayed the other. I'm not a zookeeper, we had zookeepers, they're amazing. But I did animal security and all the attractions that go with it. We had sea life with over 1,000 fish in it. Food and beverage and retail shops, gifts and all of that sort of stuff going on in restaurants. What did I know about running those as a military man? I could do operations, but I don't know how to run a shop or a zoo animal. So that was a real kind of learning for me. But we also ran hotels, we had a glamping site, we had a leisure club. What an amazing experience. And the reason I put this picture up, for those of us that work in theme parks, our job is to not see 3 people have a great time, but watch the one person who's had a terrifying ride, thinking, why are you there? How did you get there? We enjoy that. That's a sort of a slightly sadistic moment in us in theme park worlds of that person going, how am I on this ride? How did you talk me into it? But it was a great place to work. It was absolutely amazing. This is Tiger Rock. It's an amazing ride. So what you've got is a 32-year-old ride. It's a waterlog flume ride. Very much the end of its life, but we're not going to change it. We're just going to keep it going because water going down a slide, it's fairly safe, it's fairly easy. You don't need to do a lot to that. We built an enormous tiger's head, which you can see on the far left of the screen, right of the screen, depending which way you're looking. So with a massive tiger's head that you then go through the tiger's head on the drop, and it's a great ride. The thing we did, because Chessington always did things slightly differently, was built the tiger enclosure inside and outside the ride. So there are 2 bridges for the tigers to walk over, the track and over the pathway. And you can see both of those with the red kind of framework on it. So the tigers, you've got 2 enclosures inside the ride and 1 outside the ride next to the zoo building. And what I used to love about this is you go and do the opening checks in the morning. You'd stand on top of the log flume at the very high point. You've got a beautiful view of the park. You can see London in the background. It's quite pretty. But when you look down into the tiger enclosure, the tiger's sitting there going, fall off, I dare you. They knew our routine. They knew which enclosure to be in at which point of the day, because they knew we would be there doing our checks, thinking, go on, go on. Amazing experience. And when you go down the log flume, the tiger is about 1.5 meters from you. It's just there, the other side of the net. It's an amazing experience. That's the sort of thing we got to do. But if you had told me when I was 18, joining the Navy as an air engineer to go and work on helicopters for my career, because that's what I'm going to do, that you're going to build a 15-meter concrete crocodile head in the middle of an operational theme park. It's like, it's bloody daft. But this is Croc Drop. This is what we did. And it's a 15-meter crocodile head built out of polystyrene with a sprayed-on concrete with a 25-meter drop tower on it. It's a unique experience anywhere in the world at this stage. So you come out of the crocodile head, get to the top. We give you a slow spin, so you get a lovely view of the park, lull you into a full sense of security. You can see London, it's beautiful. And then just when you've forgotten you're on a drop tower, we drop you back into the crocodile head. And there's noise and there's smoke and there's everything else. It's an amazing experience. But we built that in the middle of the operational season, in the middle of a theme park, behind great big hoarding, accessing from a safety road behind it. I mean, what a project. As an aircraft engineer, you know, I'm building a construction project like this. What an amazing thing to have done. It's safety engineering, it's project management. I had very clever people doing structural design, that was beyond me. But what an amazing thing to have delivered. So I look at that with massive pride, and we won awards for that. But say the animals are amazing. You know, half of them want to eat you, the other half want to cuddle you. Here's an example of each, you can choose. I would prefer to cuddle the penguins. They are very cool. You can go and feed them and they'll just peck you to pieces. But yeah, we had a handful of lions as well. They're terrifying. We had rhino, we had giraffes. Giraffes are quite interesting animals. You can go and feed them and talk to them. They're pretty cool. And I had to look after the enclosures. I was responsible for the infrastructure and the security and the fences. So I got to know quite a lot of the animals and just be part of it with the zookeepers. It was amazing. We made Christmas. You know, Christmas is great. For any of you that still believe in Father Christmas, we had 15 Father Christmases in theme park. Sorry about that. But we made all our grottos. And the trick with this was that every kid had to believe there was one grotto. So you've got a queue of, I don't know, a couple of hundred people, and you've got to get them through into your grotto, meet Santa, get your little present and your photo and come out of it without realising there are 14 other grottos in the little woodland that you're in. That was a fairly complicated operation, but we had to design the woodland and all the rest of it. There was only ever one Santa Claus, and it was the one you saw, but we had 15 grottos. So, you know, we've got a picture at the bottom of us making our trees, covering them in snow because it never snows. 2 sea lions, we took them for a walk around the park to put them in front of the sleigh because that felt like a funny thing to do. So we had a quick photo opportunity when the park was closed of our 2 sea lions going for a walk. But we did Strictly Come Dancing. So Joe Suggs and his dance partner came down for a day. He was genuinely terrified of roller coasters, so we put him on the vampire ride, which is a pretty terrifying ride. She was up for it all day. She was great. She was a professional dancer. And Joe was just not having a good day. And of course, to get the filming, you have to do it once, no, twice, no, all day, yes. By the end of it, he was quite enjoying it. But the poor chap, when he turned up, was like, do not put me on that. And when you see him on the TV doing it, you genuinely didn't want to go on it. So they had a great day. So we got to host him all day. So I got to do some amazing things. As an air engineer, I didn't plan to do that, but it was pretty cool. Which takes me back to this. So, as Clive said, you know, this is 2005 I was flying this. The RNLI started on the beaches in about 2003. So it's just over 20 years. They've been doing lifeguarding now. So we were doing exercises. I was the pilot in this aircraft, doing exercises on search and rescue and taking people off the boats and working with the beach teams for the first time. That was a pretty cool place to be. So that was when I first worked with the RNLI. So I didn't think I'd end up there. But again, as an air engineer, I did not think at the start of my career I'd end up working with boats. But But here's a selection. So you've got the Atlantic, which is the one in the top middle, which is our 30-knot fast rib. You've got the E-class, the one on the Thames. We've got 2 stations on the Thames looking after those. Tower Lifeboat Station being the busiest in the country. There's about 700 jobs a year. The average on a station is about 150 jobs a year. You've got the 7 class on the top with the crane on the back. That's our oldest large vessel. They're about 30 years old, coming to retirement. The one in the middle, the little D class, which is our small inflatable with 3 people on it, go about 20 knots, a couple of miles off the coast if it needs to. And then the bottom one of the Shannon, which is our newest. An amazing fleet of boats. There are a couple of others out there, but that's the sort of fleet we've got. There are 3 parts to the RNLI. So the first one is the boats. We'll go out and rescue people in trouble. That's the obvious bit. The bit on the other side is the beaches, so the lifeguard service. So we're on 250 beaches around the country. And then the bit in the middle is about prevention. So I'd much rather invest in stopping you getting into trouble than having to launch a boat at all. So why would we launch a boat if it can stop you getting into trouble? It's not about not being in the water. It's about being in the water safely. About half the people the RNLI rescues didn't plan on being in the water. They could have been walking or doing something nice, not waterborne activity. But prevention is a much stronger area, so that's where a lot of the future is going to be. So that's what the RNLI tells you they do. This is what I think we do. I'll tell you what we do. So naval architecture and design. Having worked on helicopter design and aircraft work and everything else, and looking at how do we make our aircraft better and safer, I was able to apply my skills into naval architecture. Now, I'm not a naval architect. I had a very bright team of naval architects who could do the really clever stuff. But I understand enough about engineering and safety to know what good looks like. So when we're signing off the new designs of boats, or you're looking at new propellers, or you're looking at hull designs, or you're looking at human factors and ergonomics to how do you make the crew comfortable, I at least knew what I was talking about. I'd lived that from an operational point of view. As an operational engineer in an aircraft, both as a pilot and an engineer, I could relate to it. So when we were looking at cockpit design for a boat, I was able to sit there and go, yeah, I know what that looks like. I know how that feels. So my air engineering experience really came into there with my naval architecture and design. Having designed it, we built it. So these are the 7 lifeboats going through their midlife refits. Like all things, when you get to that point, we upgrade them and keep them going, just like we did with the CEng when Matt got there. So this is us stripping out a boat, taking it back to first principles, putting it in a new cockpit and modernising it. Compared to the Shannon lifeboat that we're building here, we build 4 of those a year. Brand new state-of-the-art 30-knot jet boats that can ram the beach, fully invert. But we design them, build them, paint them, and deliver them from within our factory. So it's an amazing thing to be able to do as an engineer. We've got an inshore lifeboat centre over in the Isle of Wight where we build our ribs. So the D-class, the small one at the bottom, and the Atlantic, which is our larger one, all of those are built in the Isle of Wight. We build about 20 of those a year between them, and that's an amazing team. And then the bit that people don't know is that the RNLI also owns Clayton Engineering, which is an amazing little company up in mid-Wales. So if you pick the point probably furthest from the coast in Wales, Knighton just by Hereford, and put a pin in it, that's where this factory is. So it's nowhere near the sea, but actually it's really well placed. It started as a tractor company, Martin Brigland, and in time the RNLI bought it, and it now makes all the launch and recovery equipment. So the one at the bottom of the Shannon lifeboat, 1309 sitting on it, our Shannon launch and recovery. It's combined, it's about 50 tons of that boat and that tractor and trailer. It looks like something that Thunderbirds would design. But we design and build those in-house to be able to drive into the sea, launch the boat, recover the boat, pull it back out again, fully immersible up to the top of the cabin. So we build and design all our tractors and trailers in-house as well, which is pretty impressive. We do buildings, so we've got about 600 buildings around the coast. The fancy new one with the curved roof is Wells next to the sea, which was just built to house a Shannon. So we designed and built that, fully sustainable, modern materials, flood resistant, so as the sea level rises, we're going to be fine. The picture of the really old grey building below it, Kakubri, is one of our oldest buildings. That's 150, 160 odd years old, and it's got a little Atlantic on a railway track inside it to launch. And then you've got our slipway stations. People will be familiar with seeing a boat go down a slipway, big splash at the end. There are 15 slipways. So this one down in Padstow. The sort of engineering challenges I'm facing, if you look at that one, Padstow's special. The sand is different in Padstow from everywhere else in the country, so it's eroding the legs at a different rate. I didn't know that, but that's true. And also, more importantly, the cliff next to it is falling away. Now, we all know that there's erosion around the coast, but when it's your only access to your lifeboat station, that's slightly more problematic. The only other way down there is the other bit of cliff on the other side, and that's owned by some chap called Ross Brawn, who's just gone and spent a lot of money on his beautiful house. Now he's retired from Formula One and does not need a bunch of RNLI people traipsing through his garden to get to his lifeboat station every day. So we're trying to work out how to get over cliff problems. Compared to Douglas at the bottom corner, which is our oldest slipway station, just over 100 years old. That's where the RNLI was founded, in Douglas on the Isle of Man. And we are having to replace that. That's a pretty tricky piece to be. So, you know, the infrastructure challenges I had were huge. And again, as an air engineer, playing with helicopters, to now be responsible for designing and building these things was quite an interesting place to land. And as I said, launch and recovery. All our tractors can drive into the sea, get our boats recovered and come back. So, not your average engineer's career, I would suggest. It started well. My engineering career was quite traditional from an AEO's point of view, with my training, with my engineering bits, with my operational bits, my time on the squadrons. But where that journey has taken me is a very unusual journey, and not where I would have predicted when I started my career. I didn't think I'd be looking after the RNLI. I didn't think I'd be looking after a theme park. Both are amazing opportunities. I'm moving now, I'm taking all of that into safety engineering. No surprise when you look at my career, having done safety engineering throughout my career. And every job I've been into, there's a safety theme with it. So I'm now moving into safety engineering for other people, which is quite an exciting place to be as I move beyond the RNLI. So there's my typical career. That's a career as an AEO in the Royal Navy, or not quite. But I'm very happy to take questions on that, any of that, if you have any. Clive has a microphone.